Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Michael Cupps. Michael is a productivity expert who has been in the technology, sales, and marketing industry for over 30 years. He learned the importance of productivity from an early age due to his upbringing on a farm in Texas, which taught him the value of hard work, prioritization, and managing time wisely. Michael applies these lessons to his work, helping individuals and teams to make the most of their time and priorities. He's also the host of the Habit Architect podcast and the founder of the Time Bandit. He's also the author of a book by that name, all of which we talk about here. He's really pulled it all together for people who want to not only learn these systems, but have tools to apply them. Time Bandit is the ultimate guide for those looking to leave behind chaotic and unmanageable to-do lists and ultimately reclaim their time to live a more balanced and productive life. We talk everything process, habit, routine, productivity, all that good stuff. But the thing that I like about this is it's not in the way that you see out there a lot of time of like life hacks or productivity porn. There's a bunch of stuff out there about like, you have to have this perfect process or you got to do these morning routines or all of that. This is much more simple than that. And I think much more applicable to everybody's daily lives. It's how do we start small? How do we build it? And how do we use a couple tools just to make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time? I hope you enjoy this. I love this topic. I have found the more I think and work on this topic in my own life, the better my life becomes, the better I am able to do the things that I want to do and achieve the things that I want to achieve. And I hope that this episode helps you do the same. Here is Michael Cupps. Michael, welcome to the show. I am a big nerd for efficiency and process and trying to figure out how I do more with the allotted time that I have. And so I'm excited to jump into Time Bandit and the work that you are doing and maybe pick up a few things. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoy talking about it, obviously. I'm excited to compare notes a bit.
Yeah. Let's start at the beginning, as I often do. How did you come to be a time management expert and decide to write a book on time management?
Yeah, it's really experience. That's what put me there. I've been in the software world for years. My entire career after college has somehow found my way into software. The latter part of that bit has been in efficiency software. So automation, business process management, things like that are intended to help a business be more efficient at what they're doing. And that could be doing more work in the same amount of time or doing work better, quality, et cetera. And so that's where I was studying to help my customers. In what my job involved was usually sales and marketing, where I'm managing people. It's amazing when you manage a group of people to see their different systems, good or bad.
Yeah, or lack thereof.
Yes, exactly. And they show up and every day they struggle and some of them do well. Some of them really exceed at it and some just don't. And one particular job had me flying back and forth to the UK. And so on those flights from Dallas to London, you've got a little spare time. So that's when I started putting pen to paper, primarily because that was the first time I really managed a global team. So I had somebody in Italy, someone in the UK, someone in Australia, someone in various parts of the US, and trying to keep everybody on the right priorities at the right time became a challenge. So I just started writing it for them more than anybody. So when you think about that persona that you're writing for, it was for them.
Yeah, it is amazing. Everybody has a system, right? Everybody is getting work done in a certain way. And so if somebody says, I don't think I have a system, I just do my work, that is your system, right? It's just a hodgepodge thing of next task up or whatever, however you're organizing it in your head. There is always a system. And I think if you realize that, then you can start to say, oh, maybe if there is a system, maybe I can tweak that system and maybe there are improvements I can make.
Absolutely. And those systems come from anywhere, really. If you think about some of the people that are really time efficient, they're people that at some point in their life, they were either on a farm or ranch or building a house, doing something in construction, something like that, where things had to happen in a certain order in order for the job to be completed in the right amount of time. So that's one thing. So people do have a system, whether they know it or not. They've learned a system. And then one of the most terrifying things to watch is somebody that has a system that doesn't work for them and watch how just completely drained they are at the end of the day. And that's not a good system either, right?
Yeah. Are there any commonalities that you see in systems that are not working?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that doesn't work is to-do lists. And everybody has them, and we all have them for various reasons. Sometimes you have them when you're just going to the grocery store, which is okay. But it's the people that just really rely on to-do lists. And I've seen people that just have 30 something items on a sheet of paper, and there's no way to understand which one's most urgent, which one should I do first, and then what happens when somebody interrupts you, where do you get back to? And I think to-do list, especially with the systems that we have, email, we have calendars, we have multiple calendars, or we may have project boards for, say, a marketing team. They may have an Asana board or whatever they use. Salesforce.com may be bringing up your task if you're a salesperson. So those to-do lists just propagate everywhere. And you need some ability to just really funnel that into, okay, where am I going to focus next?
So what do we do? How do we break free of the to-do list? And I imagine we have to record tasks somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong inherently with having everything written down. It's that, if I can put words in your mouth, it's that we're not taking the next step and then prioritizing and figuring out a plan for the to-do list. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. That's fair. And if, let's say you don't have a system that you do have everything consolidated, and most people don't, right? But if you're just going through your day and you've got work that you do on your daily basis, that's your business as usual stuff. If you're a salesperson, it may be following up. If you're a marketing person, it may be project work. If you're a claims adjuster, it's claims. Just make sure you're tuned in to whatever that system is that's giving you your to-do list at that amount of time that's appropriate to do that. But when you come out of that, make sure you have a system of what you're going to do next. And some of it maybe do nothing, right? Because you need a break. But the point is, you've got to find a way to prioritize that next work, whatever that is.
Yeah. So what are your favorite tools to use to do that work?
Yeah, mine is the Eisenhower Matrix, quite frankly. When I found the Eisenhower Matrix, it was the first time I figured out I didn't have a good value system or estimation system, I guess is the way to put it. So I just viewed work as, well, my VP told me to do this, so I better do that one first. Or this was an angry customer, so I need to do that next. And sometimes that is the case, but then you're just led all around in all different directions. So the Eisenhower Matrix to me put priority in the simplistic form. And you know the system, I know, but your listeners may. It's a 4-quadrant system. You have important and urgency, and those are the things you do first. You've got important but not urgent, and those are the things you schedule. Urgent but not important, you try to delegate those in a number of ways, and AI has opened up a great window of things to delegate. And then the not important, not urgent, just stop doing them. And that scares people when you say you're not going to do something, but sometimes you just got to give up on certain things or park it later. So it may not be stop, it may be just not yet.
Yeah. So just for everybody too, because you went through that a little quickly. So think of a T chart, right? Yep. And on the up and down axis, you have importance, or you have urgency. How urgent is it? Is it really urgent or is it not urgent? And then on the horizontal axis, you have, is it important? So not important or important. And then that gives you 4 grids: highly urgent, highly important, highly urgent, but not important, highly important, but not, whatever they are. It gives you those 4. So if you map that out or you draw that out, you have that, and then you slot your tasks into those 4 quadrants.
Yep. And that it's easy to think about those 2 toggle switches for me, but I do have a mobile app. I'm not here to pitch it necessarily, but what's nice
pitch away. Go ahead.
You put a task in there and you answer 2 questions. Is it important and is it urgent? And based on those quick toggle switches, it's going to drop it in the quadrant that matters. Now, you still have to do some thinking about if you've got 6 things in your do first category, you're going to have to then have another system in your mind, some way to say, I'm going to do this one first, et cetera. But at least it takes that big list into a smaller, more manageable list.
And this is the Time Bandit app. That's what it's called?
Yeah, it's on Apple and Google Play.
Okay. So if people want to go check that out, I want to drive people there, but let me ask for those who are maybe not as tech enabled, because this is something that I've always struggled with the Eisenhower Matrix. Is I hear people saying, you don't want to just do a to-do list. You got to write it down every day and you're just always writing to-do lists. But the Eisenhower Matrix to me feels the same way. It's okay. Yeah, it helps me prioritize now. And then between now and tomorrow, 100 other things come up and I got to rewrite this thing every day. What's the process for making this a sustainable habit?
Yeah, for me, and what I wrote about was doing something daily. So whether it's in the morning or the last thing you do in the evening is just go back through those priorities and switch that toggle switch one way or the other. If it wasn't urgent today, is it urgent tomorrow? If it's maybe not. And so you just leave it be. And it's just that kind of reflection, I think, is important. And you know what? People are doing that when they rewrite their to do list anyway. They just may not be thinking that far ahead. And I think that there's this notion of just reducing clutter that we all hear about and read about and stuff like that. And sometimes when you clean a room, you feel good. Sometimes it's just that cleaning out those to dos in a different order. Maybe not they've gone away, but maybe they're moved out of your vision so you can really focus on a few things.
Yeah. So it's just, you just have to create the habit of a regular check-in, a regular assessment. And that makes the argument for make sure you have a simple process.
Yes,
Keep it as simple as you possibly can. I've seen people overdo their process, and I've overdone mine from time to time. And then you're just like, my God, there's no way I'm going to stick to this.
You're spending more time on your process than you are on the task. Yeah. The interesting thing is, right when I first came out with this, it didn't have an app. I created some notebooks, and I would use it when I was doing team type facilitation. And it was interesting to watch people do it because one thing, when you write it down, it stays in that quadrant even until you scratch it out. But so it's a little less fluid when it's not electronic. But it was interesting because what was wrong about it is the spaces that I gave them to write in, some of them write big letters. And so they didn't have as much space for their things. And some of them wrote really tinies and they couldn't really see it. And there was such a variation. Now, it ended up working for them if that's the method they choose. But with writing it out, my thought was that you could do one a week, but there's a lot of scratching out and adding to. So on paper, it gets a little laborious, but some people just prefer that.
Yeah,
it makes it easier for us.
That's a good point too, though. Like, it's pretty easy to just create the template once in Word. It's just a T-chart. And so you create it once in Word, you print it 365 times and bind it in a 3-ring or a spiral notebook. Like, it's not that big of a lift.
Absolutely. That's the easy part. It's getting in the habit, that discipline of refreshing it.
Yeah.
And we all like crossing things off of our to-do list.
It feels so good. It's the best.
Yeah. And let's not forget about the delegate thing. That's the thing that I think, and I don't mean to take this down that road to talk just about AI.
Yeah.
But AI agents are now going to give us a huge opportunity to offlift some of that stuff to that delegate quadrant, because you can trust your agent once it's set up for you and trained. And before, I'd talk to people and say, well, delegate that. And they're like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a solopreneur. There's no one else to delegate it to. And I get that, but there really are opportunities for automation these days.
Yeah. How do you see that playing out right now? Like, where do you see people in the current market taking advantage of technology? Because I think there's a lot of, we're going to be able to do this, but like, where are we today? And where have you seen people get efficient with their time using technology and AI?
Yeah, I think it's the things like research or quick thoughts on pulling your notes together from a meeting. I think meeting note takers are great because they can actually summarize maybe an hour meeting into, here's the 3 things I took away from that thing. So those types of things are going to come in, and you could do it for a meeting. You could also do it for just yourself. You can start talking about a project and it's going to summarize what you need to do. Certainly all the GPTs out there can do research quickly. You may need to validate it. You got to find the one that you trust. And I think if you can spend the time to train it to yourself, then you should, because then it'll start adapting. Now, I've played with it a little bit, but I haven't enacted the latest Chat GPT version or OpenAI version that will actually do tasks for you. I haven't done that yet, but they're out now. The question is, will they do what you need them to do for your business?
Yeah. And this will keep evolving.
Yeah.
I decided that I needed to get better at AI. And so I went to the place that we all go for information, YouTube.
Yeah.
And there are an endless amount of great little courses on there or videos that people make that give you much better insight into how to use this. And I'm trying to scroll through right now, give this guy some credit because I watched a bunch of his videos the other day. Jeff S.U., tech guy who works in the tech industry, and he has some great videos. And one of the best ones was on how to prompt. Yeah. And he actually laid out the 6 pieces of a really good prompt. Super simple. Anybody can use them. And we'll find those videos and link them in the show notes. His framework of like the 6 parts of a prompt, of a good prompt, when you create a good prompt, you can save it. So the way that he was saying it was, if you think about anything that you do repetitively, I
Yep.
always have to research a new company before a meeting. I
Exactly.
always have to synthesize my notes into an email. I always have to, like, any of those things, those simple kind of inane but repetitive tasks.
Yeah.
Can you create a prompt that you can just plug in the prompt and then drop in whatever the text is or the images or whatever the thing is that you need analyzed? And you could do it for research, you could do it for write-ups, you could do it for whatever. But I was like, just
Absolutely.
those two things in general, I think get people most of the way there.
Absolutely. And the research piece and the note summaries of whatever. The other day, I was in a meeting. I took a picture of the whiteboard after the meeting and I uploaded it in ChatGPT and said I'd like a summary and action item, and it did it. And that's a lot of work to try to look at a whiteboard, take it all down. And I know there's electronic whiteboards and stuff now, but this was a physical whiteboard. And that's just amazing. And by the way, that prompt engineering there's so many creative people out there writing useful prompts. Whatever business you're in, you can probably find a YouTube video or go to LinkedIn and you can find somebody. There's one that Jodie Cook, who's out of the UK, and she's doing some great stuff for small businesses. She gives you the way to write the prompt for various tasks in a small business. There's a lot of experts out there already, and I'm sure it'll just keep evolving.
Yeah, it's funny, the cottage industry of prompt writers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference. If you play around with any of the GPTs, you can, depending on how you write that prompt, you're going to get a slightly different answer. Right?
Yeah. So, yeah. It was good. And I would encourage people, because I was like, I don't know. I can't really see the application to what I'm doing. I like to write. It's often easier. I have a voice and a style, so it's often easier just to say what I want to say. But as I was watching Jeff's videos, I was like, oh, there is much more to this than I thought. And he simplifies it down to a level that was really understandable. So I was like, okay, it is worth spending some time to see if we can create some efficiencies with this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about, let's go back a little bit. Okay. You mentioned you got to do it every day. You got to create a habit. Mm-hmm. You, in addition to becoming a time management expert, have also become a habit expert.
Yeah.
And so what advice can you give people on how to set this as a habit?
Yeah. Yeah. Just, we can talk a lot in depth about habits, because I tend to lean into habits more than I lean into priorities. And actually, if you think about the workflow, I look at whatever the task is that you have, consider it under three ways. Should it be, or could it be a habit first, before you put it on any task list? If you're doing it every day, or you need to do it every other day, or whatever the frequency is, then you need to think about habitizing it if you can. And then if not, is it a one-off to do, or is it something you need to do every day as a business as usual, but you rely on other inputs in order to do it? I call that business as usual work, right? Which you just time block. But making your day a daily habit is just like, so many people get up and they go drink a cup of coffee, right? And that's the way they wake up, or whatever adjective they use for that experience. They may go for a run first, etc. Just put it in there. Just stack it in there some way. Just give yourself a cue in all your other daily habits that you're doing, that you dedicate 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever your schedule looks like, and just do it. And what it does give you is peace of mind. So if you do it in the evening before you go to bed, at least you're going to feel a little bit more in control of tomorrow, because now I need to focus on these three things first. If you do it first thing in the morning, the same may apply. Now you're ready to go tackle the day, because I'm going to go do this. And one of the things that we have to be careful of is we have to protect our times, right? Because there are so many things that can take time away from us. It could be a boss, which is difficult. It could be notifications on your cell phone that you get distracted and off you're running. A family member is asking a question about a veterinarian. And I say that's very specific because that happened to me today. So there's just things like that. But the important thing is that you have your plan. And if you have your plan, you've at least got a head start into it.
So what do you say to people who started for a couple of days, fall off, and they just can't quite lock in the habit? Any tips for those folks?
Yeah, it's okay. If you fell off once, get going again, I think is the key element, because it's just consistency over time. You'll build that neural pathway that says this is something you do every day. So don't worry if you fall off once, get back on track if you can. But in general, what I've found, especially I didn't realize this, O'Brien, until I started coaching more people one-on-one in particular, where they were saying they wanted to do something, and then they were having trouble consistently doing it. And then I've backed up and said, why do you want to do this? Why is this important to you? And if you're not tying those habits to a particular value, then you're likely to quit that. And I know that sounds simple to do, but the three things in my book that I really emphasize are prioritization, habits, and balance. Yeah. Now, when I talk to somebody, I wrap that in values, because if you don't have a value that you're tying that to, it could be a sales quota, it could be your family, whatever it is. If you can tie that habit to that value, you're going to have a much better success rate, because it means something to you. And sometimes that may mean it's a long range thing. You want to run a marathon, so you're running a mile today. That kind of thing is a simple example, but it could be that you're saving for retirement and you need to do something daily that either takes an expense away or helps you earn more.
I'm taking a note of that for myself, because I want to go through. I do a lot of writing with the coach I work with, and that's a good writing prompt to think about the habits that I want to form. Because, so I interviewed a woman who helps companies build strategy, Tricia Sanders. Great conversation. But she introduced this concept of even over, which I had never heard before. And she talks about setting your top priority. And if it's really your top priority, you have to be willing to commit to it, even over everything else.
Yes.
And so if your top priority is getting up and running every morning, you have to be willing to get up and run even over exhaustion and lack of sleep. You have to be willing to get up and run even over it being cold outside, even over discomfort. And I thought that was just a great framework to really test yourself. Especially, I think it applies to what you're talking about, because we all have had that experience where we're like, I want to do this. I wish I had this end state. But in reality, like for me, a good example would be like, I wish I could just dial my diet in and look great for 6 months and just really go at it. But then ice cream shows up and I'm like, I don't know that I want that even over ice cream. That like eighth ab or the ice cream, I'm usually choosing the ice cream. And so there's just that even over, if we're not willing to make that connection, I think that's where we lose it.
Yeah.
We're not clear about that.
Absolutely. And if you've ever talked to or been around a professional athlete, it's interesting. They don't necessarily deprive themselves completely, but for a period of time they are, because their most important thing is training for the new season.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was listening to an interview today, as a matter of fact, the Texas Rangers, whom I'm a big fan of, even before they could find a way to win a game. They won the World Series a few years ago, just a year out, actually. And a lot of the players came back to camp last year and they were different. They were talking about how they were different shaped. Some of them gained weight. Some of them pitchers had strong core. They were a little less strong. And some of it had to do with time from winning that last game of the World Series to when they check in for pitchers and catchers. But some of it was other things. Their agents now were taking advantage of that because they could get more money for whatever signings and things like that. So they got all these distractions that occurred, and it affected that. But the ones that just lock in and they know that they've got 6 weeks to get ready for pitchers and catchers check-in and spring training, they won't let even over. They won't. That's where they live for that 6 weeks. Now, when the season's over, they may go for ice cream, or they may go do that vacation or whatever it is. But that's just kind of it. And so sometimes, we're not always training to be in a World Series, but if that value is something that you really want, you really need, just keep that front and center, and you have to drive that way.
Yeah. I just think it's good to be honest with ourselves too. There are plenty of things we want, but we are not willing to do them over other things. And so I think it can be really helpful to identify the things we want and what we're willing to sacrifice to get them and what we're not willing to sacrifice to get them. There was
absolutely.
I can't remember who wrote this. It might have been Tim Urban on the Wait But Why blog, which is a really interesting one. And I can't remember exactly where I found it, but we'll try to find it and link it. But it talks about the suffering you want in your life. And the best question that you can ask yourself is, what kind of suffering do I want? Because your success, your experiences, the things you do and achieve, the situations you put yourself in, they all are going to hinge on how much suffering you're willing to endure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that to circle that back, I think this applies to habit formation because those are the types of things that get in the way of creating these habits.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to those values again. How much are you willing to sacrifice to get there? And some things aren't that much, right?
Yeah.
And so you can stack those and get going. But others, those bigger things, you have to be prepared to give something else up or many things up.
Yeah.
And so the thing that people fail to do is they think, let's use a marathon because it's an easy analogy. They say, I want to run a marathon. And what they may be comfortable doing is getting out and running every day. But do they have the right diet? Are they taking in the right fluids to actually run that marathon when the day comes? And they don't, so they sacrifice something else, and it could be very painful if they're not prepared for that, just because they might have an innate talent in something, and so they can get by doing that. But it's that other side of it that's going to throw them out of balance in some way. Now, sometimes when you're young and you can just do it. I've got a friend who showed up for a marathon he hadn't trained when he made it. That was all he wanted to do is just finish it.
Yeah.
It's one of the, it just depends on the circumstances, but it is, what are you willing to give up to get there?
Yeah.
And is it worth it? Is it worth it to you? Not to everybody else. Is it worth it to you?
Let's talk about accountability. I'm curious your take on the uses of accountability, when it makes sense to have an accountability partner or system, and how to set those things up.
Yeah, I think my view on this has changed. I think if you can have an accountability partner for anything, do it. Even if it's your spouse, even if it's a friend that you're saying, hey, I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm going to stop drinking Coca-Colas, or I'm going to write this book. Just if you tell it to somebody, then you've got accountability. Whether they're checking in on you every day or not, you've now put some accountability out there. So I urge you to think about what that accountability is. Just find that partner. So the other way you can do accountability is track it. Habit trackers are phenomenal for that, because if you decide that these 3 habits are going to make an outcome for you in a year, if you track it and can see streaks, then you're going to have some accountability to yourself that's visual, because no one wants to look at that habit tracker and say, oh, there's a lot of misses there.
Yeah.
And again, that's why we put it in our app. The habits are there too. So you can see your streaks. You can see when you didn't do it, when you did. And I think that accountability is there for yourself. But if you can bring in an accountability partner, that's even better. And like I said, they don't have to check in on you every day, but they know.
Yeah. Let me ask you, what's the best way to structure an accountability partner?
Depends on the activity. If you look at things like Alcoholics Anonymous, that's why they give you a sponsor, right? Or they find you a sponsor, whatever the mechanism is. So there's some ways that the system is just set up for that. So if you're a business leader and you think that there are habits that your team needs to have, I would figure out the way to say, here's your sponsor on that, and you wouldn't have to call them a sponsor, but your accountability partner. So I think that's one way to do it. The other thing is gamification of work. I'm thinking about the workplace now. Gamification came around because of that, right? There's accountability against your peers or with your peers on certain things. And so if the activity is right and the reward system is set up fairly, then I think gamification of things like that is a very good use of accountability.
Yeah. I think I told you this story when we were prepping, but when I started doing the job I'm doing now in sales, I had no network, no nothing. So it was all calling and dialing on the phone. And after about 7 or 8 years, I developed a decent network, and I wanted to switch over and start tapping into that network, because getting introduced to somebody is always a more pleasant experience than reaching out cold to somebody. I was like, okay, I'm going to start making this switch. But I had created these habits and this incentive model for myself where if I was given the choice, I would go back to the phone and call people, even though the results weren't showing up, just because that was the habit, that was the incentive. I said, okay, I want to do this. And I have a sales coach who's become a good friend of mine. And I went to her and I said, I need you to be my accountability partner for this. Would you do that? And she said, yes. And I said, all right, I don't need you to reach out to me. I am going to send you an email every day at the end of the day and tell you how I either got something from or gave something to my network.
Yeah.
And if you want to comment on it, but I owe you this every day. And I wound up doing it for 6 months. And she was like, hey, do we still need to be doing this? This is great, but it's been 6 months. I was like, you know what? I need to keep doing this because it's not a habit yet. It just is not natural yet. I need this to just feel natural. And I wound up going another 12 months after that. So it was 18 months. I sent her an email almost every day. I probably missed a couple times, but it became natural, and it is now how I run my business. What I learned from that, the power of me owning the accountability to her, even though it was the behavior I wanted to change,
Yep.
I think made it so much more successful.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people, if you need accountability, don't look to somebody to come after you, because I
Yep.
think that just creates resentment. It gives you the opportunity to fail, and then now somebody's mad at you and you've let somebody down. On the flip side, if you owe it to them, you might still fail, but I think it just gets rid of a lot of the resentment or angst or whatever, like shame you have in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Shame, that's the right word for it. Shame. I don't think we can shame ourselves into creating new behaviors in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. But like you just said, you had a reinforcement capability that helped you say, I accomplished that today. Here's how it did. And you went on to the next day. And whether she was reading it or not, you rewarded yourself with that victory.
Yeah. Right? And she replied enough that I knew that she was paying attention, but it was on me to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing psychologically about it. It's hard to do things alone. You hear it a lot, but even if you think you're alone, there's probably somebody there that can still help you be accountable for what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I think about solopreneurs and entrepreneurs all the time. They feel like they're alone. We'll use the cliche, they're in their garage coding away and they don't know when they're going to get to the other end of it. If they have somebody they can at least share that with, even if it's somebody that doesn't know the first thing about coding, as long as there's a milestone that you can tell them, I did it again today, over time, you're going to get that muscle memory and it's going to be who you are.
Yeah. So I want to poke on activity trackers a little bit too. I know there are apps out there that are activity trackers, but couldn't an activity tracker just be a checklist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know there's the book out there, The Checklist Manifesto, which talks a lot about checklists. And I have actually created some really good habits with checklists myself. Yep. Curious how you have used checklists for accountability or process.
Yeah. I think for habits, it needs to be as simple as you're willing to work within. If you have to describe how you felt today doing that habit, I think you're going to drop that habit soon because you're asking yourself to build two habits, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's just got to be a simple check. Did you do it or did you not do it today? Or weekly or whatever the frequency is. That to me is the reinforcement and reward enough. Now, there's some analysis around streaks that make you feel better. This time you went 13 days before you didn't do it. And then next time it may be 17 days. And that's great. So you can still have some reflection and fun with that. But I think for habits in particular, make it an easy check. Just as simple as a check.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen some people that put their habit tracker together and there's 17 things that they're trying to track in a day. And that's a different discussion. So there may be ways that you're taking on too much. And if you have that many things you're trying to build in one time, maybe you stage that over time that you bring in new habits later.
Yeah. I had wanted to get better at my weekly prep. And so I knew what was coming up. And so I just said, all right, what do I need to do on a Sunday night or Monday morning so that I feel prepared for the week and I can move through the week without that anxiety of, am I ready for everything? And so I came up with, 5 or 6 things for Sunday night. And then it was like the first of the month, I also need to be doing these things. And so I created one for the first of the month that's got a couple more things on it. And over the last probably 7 or 8 years, some of those things have come off the list. I've added some new things to the list. But the one habit was sitting down and working through my checklist. That was the habit. But that habit actually created 5 to 10 other behaviors. And so I just find checklists are a great way to sit down, especially when you're trying to do this type of prep work or those repetitive tasks or things that need to get done. You can bunch them all and then say, all right, I'm going to take this time and I'm going to sit down and complete this checklist.
Yeah. Yeah. And if a career that is interesting and they're very good at this that you wouldn't necessarily think of as teachers, from elementary teachers to college professors, maybe a little less. But if you think about primary school, they've got to do things every day for those kids, college, high school kids to very young kids. They have some things they have to do, but they also have to be planning ahead because this is where we need to be in the curriculum for us to get through it all this year. So there's some interesting things there. And you can actually use AI. I hate to keep going back to that in our conversation, but where you can take your next week and you can put it in AI and say, help me sort this out. And not so much so it solves your problem, but to help you review it and get ready.
Yeah.
So it's a couple of thoughts there.
Going back to the Eisenhower Matrix. So this is good for those tasks, those things that are either urgent or important that we want to get done. We've all had the experience, I think, I don't know, maybe just me, but where we look at the to-do list and there are things that just hang on the to-do list and they hang and they hang. And then we ultimately are like, I don't need to do that anymore. How do we get better at assessing that stuff up front and being really clear about saying no to tasks that might linger and fall off eventually anyway?
Yeah, it comes back to urgency is pretty easy, right? If there's a deadline and it's got to be there, then that kind of takes care of itself. It may be low importance, but if you have to do it as part of your job, you put it on there and you get it done. It's that importance grading scale that you're talking about there. And so that it's a difficult thing. So sometimes there are things that make it important to you. And sometimes there are other things that make it important to you, right? So whether it's within or somebody else telling you this is important.
Yeah.
And that's why there's this whole world of managerial people conveying what's important and what's not is really important. And it's not, we don't really train managers to do that much either about how they talk about things to their workers about what's important and what's not. They just say, this is the work you have to do, and we trained you to do it, so go do it. So that importance figure, I think you've just got to sit down and do it several times. And you've got to pay attention to the reward back that it does, right? So if you do that, did it have a cause and effect that created an environment that was good, whether it's for you personally or for your company or whatever? You start teaching your neural pathways that those are important outcomes, and these are important steps to get to that outcome. It eventually gets there because what really helps more experienced people, salespeople or whomever, is because they learn that along the way. And you can take examples. If you have sales in particular, you may have a particular rep that just keeps making his number or her number, but they aren't really good at keeping the CRM up to date, right? Or something like that.
Yep.
What they figured out is their value system says that closing those deals helps the company more than me spending an hour updating CRM. Now, a sales manager might disagree. They'd probably figure somewhere in the middle. But at the end of the day, it is that revenue that person's responsible for. And some of the employees that are less sure about their own capabilities to go impact revenue are going to spend more time probably in the CRM doing work because of fear or not knowing which direction to run in. So that's work they know what to do. So they just take care of it. And so I think some of that experience comes in and you begin to get your value system set for you and your job necessarily. And I don't know that managers, sales managers in particular, do a really good job of helping new people understand that, of which is most important.
Yeah.
When you have to make a choice between these two items, what do you do?
I think a lot of leaders are not great at that or not thinking about that, or sometimes don't have line of sight into that. I work with a lot of teams across our business, but so do a lot of other people. So we might be working on a deal together, but they're working on 5 other clients and 2 other deals with other people. And I have no line of sight into that. I don't know how they should prioritize their time. Yep. So let's say that somebody's listening to this and they're like, I'm all in, Michael. I have written everything down. I've prioritized it. I do it every day. It's a routine, but I do it in the morning and then my boss comes in and drops a shitstorm on my desk and here's everything that has to get done. And I can just never seem to get to what I need to do. How do we get better at navigating that and having those conversations?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes there's things that happen that just happen and no one can stop the momentum. You've got to go address it. It's some sort of catastrophe or whatever the case may be. So that aside from those kind of, let's just call them natural disasters that occur that we have to address in our work.
The black swans.
Yeah. So the other things is, I think this is what the power of having your priorities tied to your values is when that happens. And I've had to do this before and it's not easy. So I understand the navigation is another problem, but you've got a list of things that he or she may have assigned you over the course of 3 weeks, a month, whatever it is. And when they drop that next one on there, you actually have to be bold enough to say, okay, here are the 4 other things that you've told me are most important. Do you want one of these to slide down? Which one do you want to come off my list altogether? Which one can you reassign to another person, et cetera? And you have to involve them in making the decision with you because we only have so much time to do it. Now, there's a lot of us, and me included, it's especially in my career, is we think, oh, okay, I'll do it and just try to work harder, work hard. And then the next day you have to work harder and harder and you're always catching up, or you're always feeling like you're putting in more hours on them than you are for you. But I think you have to be ready to have those candid conversations and just know that some people don't take it well when you make them make the choice for you. But that's what you have to do in those circumstances, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You have to. Now, you can't just do it blindly. You have to know what's priorities and what's not. And you have to say something has to come off. How can you help me make this decision?
Yeah. It seems to me like if you want to level up, you have to get better at paring things down. I've just found in my work life that the better I perform, the more business I'm bringing in, the more clients I have, the more responsibility I have internally as a leader, the less time I have to do other things. And so that coffee with a vendor, that I was just thinking about this the other day, actually, like the vendors who reach out and, hey, it'd be great to catch up and tell you about what we're doing. Like, you don't have time for that stuff anymore. There are things that have to come off the list, and understanding and prioritizing where those are, and then being willing to say no and actually developing the skill of saying no and the comfort with saying no, which a lot of us are people pleasers or don't like conflict. And that can be scary, but it is a skill you can build.
Absolutely. It is a skill you can build. And sometimes you have to start by saying no to yourself. And that's what you were just talking about, right? You're
That's
saying,
the hardest.
Okay, now I've got all this to do and this is important. And I really would like to see Bob, and Bob and I have had great coffee talks, but it just doesn't fit right now. So you had to say no to yourself first. And so I would say that conversation I talked about having with your boss, you need to have that conversation with yourself first, because you may have things that you can move down to delegate elsewhere or just stop doing or do less of it. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. Saying no is hard. Saying no to ourselves is hard. Saying no to anyone else is very difficult. But the people that really thrive are the ones that know how to do it. And like you said, it's a skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an evolution. That's why I like this topic so much. Is it's just an evolution. I have people at work either come up to me and ask about my process, because I'm very process oriented, and I'll kind of lay out how I do my work. I often get people going, I could never do what he does. I could never run that. The reality is, if you had shown my working process now to myself 15 years ago, I would have had the same reaction. It's not like I just dropped in and was like, I'm this robot and I'm going to have this incredibly well thought out process. It was just like, hey, I'm doing my job. And then it was like, you know what? I'm not doing as well over here, or I'm missing something, or I'm losing out on an opportunity. And I just would solve that problem. And then I would solve the next problem, and I would solve the next problem. Eventually it was like, oh, great. I've got this really efficient thing that runs decently well, but it just evolves over time. And I think people put the pressure on themselves that they need to be time management gurus right out of the gate.
Yeah. And you're not going to be.
No.
And that is part of the progression of some people will like to move up and take on more responsibilities. And it may be innately because they can handle that distribution of work. What happens a lot of times is somebody gets promoted and they were very good at what they were doing. And then they find themselves doing things they don't like doing. So that's okay too. You can say, hey, I want to get back to doing that because that's what I enjoyed. And so there has to be a way for you to mentally file the work coming in and then the work going out, and where you spend your energy doing it. And some people just struggle with it. And if that's not for you, then just know that. And that's a good thing, right? When you know what you don't want to do, now you can go try other things.
Yeah.
Right?
This is maybe a good transition point. We've been talking about individuals who want to get better at this stuff. A lot of leaders listen to this show too. So if I'm a leader of others, okay, great. I've got my house in order, but the people around me are still all over the place. What have you found as a coach of this stuff works to help teams start to adopt this and see the value and take on some of these habits themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I'll say here. The first thing I'll say is, a lot of times when those teams are stressed out like that, it's because the leader hasn't effectively demonstrated to them what is important and what's urgent and how to make the difference. So you can take the Eisenhower Matrix and you can change that, right? Instead of important and urgency, you can say impact and cost, or whatever your metrics is. And then you can start plotting what activities they're doing. And they will start to see that when I do these things, I have a bigger impact on the company for various reasons. It could be revenue or speed or whatever. But you can take that same metric just to give them the scale. So they start to understand and buy into why and how they're going to work on high impact things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of tedious things, something maybe that isn't as impactful. Now, some things have to get done anyway, but that's up for the leader to decide what the value system is. And then on top of that, they really have to be good at articulating the outcomes. So if you say, we need this outcome, and in order to get there, we know that these types of things have to happen, whatever they are. Could be a marketing project, for example. And we know that the graphic design and the copywriter and this all have to land it in the right way. So as long as you're good at articulating what the outcome is supposed to be, and then you can help manage them along the way, they're going to focus on that priority of making that high impact. And it really becomes what I just said there, O'Brien, is communication.
Yeah.
I think that's just it. I think too many times leaders put their people in a box. You're the graphic designer. You just go do graphic design stuff. And you are the copywriter. You go do copywriting stuff. At some point, you need to bring them out of that and say, when we deliver this fantastic thing, it's going to look like this. And it's going to look like this because the copywriters did this and the graphic design people did this. And that's how it's eventually going to deliver the great product. And that just a lot of times doesn't happen with teams.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's interesting. I know we're getting close on time. I do have one more question for you, and this is a whole show into itself, so we don't need to unpack this. But because of your work with habits, I know that you have done a lot of work with addiction.
Yep.
And would love to hear for anybody who, we don't need to go into the deeper end of the pool, but for people who maybe are addicted to YouTube or addicted to Instagram or addicted to something that is getting in the way of them achieving their goals. Maybe it's not a huge problem, but it is a distraction. What tips do you have for breaking those addictions and building focus back into the things that are important?
Yeah, I think the first thing to realize is that habits can be good and habits can be bad. And we form habits over time that are just what they are. Now, it's up to you to decide some of those process habits, like you talked about, whether it's gambling or gaming or YouTube addictions, those are process habits. And what's happened is in your mind, you've created a neural pathway that's an okay thing and it stimulates dopamine some way for you. You're getting pleasure out of that in some way. So if you want to break that habit, you somehow have to break that habit and realize that it is a habit. It's not just something you can turn on and off. You're going to have to train yourself out of that habit. And so that could mean making it harder to get to. It could mean any number of things that allows you to break that habit, but just give it a name. Know what it is. It is, if it's YouTube, give it a name that you want to stop doing. So you have personified it, and now you're going to start building a neural pathway out of it. But breaking addictions, certainly chemical addictions are difficult because people build that up and then they get addicted to a chemical.
Sure.
But the same thing's happening with a YouTube addiction, right? There is a chemical, dopamine, that is affecting everybody's pleasure zone. And so they're getting there for some escape reason. And so what you have to do is just break that habit and understand what it is. So on your habit tracker, you should have stop whatever it is, stop sugar, stop drinking, stop YouTube, just so you're treating it as any other habit that you're trying to build, but you're trying to break it. And I do study a lot about cognitive behavior therapy because I think that's the thing that kind of answers those questions for me is if you got yourself there, you can get yourself out of it mentally. Now, again, I want to put a cushion on top of that. If it's a chemical addiction, you may need help to get out of it. And even if it's a process addiction, you may need help to get out of it. But just understand that it has become a habit for you. And now you have to have a system to get out of it. And the best thing you can do is try to replace it with something else that's more fulfilling or right, whether it's work or physical exercise or something, just do something. And so there's a couple of tricks I think you need to think about when you're thinking about it in the form of that. Now, you have an addictive habit that you want to break. The most powerful thing you have is a pause. So before you open up YouTube, if that's the example, pause for just a minute and think about the other things that you could do before you open that up. If you can just put that buffer in there, that's going to give you a little bit more power to take control over the situation. And there's a lot of other tricks associated with that. There's an organization that I work with called Smart Recovery. I recommend it, even if you're not a drug addict or alcohol addiction, because they address all addictions in a way that is, how do you break the neural pathway and build a new one? So I think it's a.
Is it a book?
It's a method. It's a nonprofit.
Okay.
That has
a
yes.
method.
You can go buy the book. There's a workbook in there, and it's interesting because it starts with, guess what? Hierarchy of values. So what are your values, and then you work back from that. And they've got different tricks of cost benefit analysis and things like that can help you think about the habit and what's it cost you to do that habit versus doing something else. And it applies to any of those process habits as well.
Okay. I love it. I appreciate you addressing that. I think you gave a lot more than I was thinking we'd be able to cram into that amount of time. Michael, this is awesome. Really appreciate you coming on. There is a ton for people to listen to and re-listen to and start to implement in their lives. And that's what I would say to people who are listening. Take one thing from this and try to apply that one thing. And then once that becomes a habit, maybe you take a second thing and you implement that. Don't feel like you need to do all of this all the time. There's like efficiency porn out there where it's like, you got to have the best routine, morning routine and evening routine, and you got to recharge, but then you got to grind, but then you got to, and it's just, it's not realistic for any individual living a normal, complicated life. So
you could be exhausted by 10 a.m. if you did all those things you're supposed to do, right?
Yes, exactly. So just encourage people, take it slow, but just keep at it, like Michael was saying. So Michael, any final words that you want to share with the audience on this topic that we didn't hit?
No, just that what you just ended on is just keep at it. Habits are about small incremental steps that you consistently perform. And just remember that. If you break a day, you miss a day, it's okay. Get back in and do it the next day, because that's how you build habits. And with prioritization, I can't emphasize enough just the value system. If you can tie all of the things you're doing to a value, it's going to be more important, and you're going to know what becomes important for you.
Love it.
Those are simple, but you need to think about them.
Yeah. Simple, not easy.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you for coming on. Everybody, thank you for listening, and hope that this helps you live a more productive life. Not so that you can just necessarily be more productive, but that you can do more of the things that you love and enjoy to do. Best of luck to everybody out there.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.